Hello.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you, Bradley? Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Yes, hello, Amanda.
Hi, Amanda.
Hi, how are you?
All right.
Good.
And Samantha's here.
Meet you.
Yeah.
Hi, how are you?
Hi. All right. How are you?
That's good.
And Shaima's here.
Great.
Yeah.
Everybody.
Hello.
So this could be a faint whistling sound. I don't know if it's coming on my end.
No, I don't know. It's maybe like a fan or something.
Oh my God.
Shayan, hello.
Oh wow, awesome. Cool.
Okay. Well, welcome to the meeting. This is our weekly meeting. Usually goes for about 2 hours. Usually people drop in and out. If you have to go, you can go, but we try to cover a lot of topics in this week. And then it will be recorded so people can look at it later. A lot of people aren't able to make the meeting because we have people from like India where it's evening to North America where sometimes like for the West Coast it's about 7 in the morning and the East Coast it's about 10 in the morning. So people, and then in Europe it's about midday. So, or, early afternoon. We even have someone from Brazil who comes at about, I don't know, it's like noon there or something. So, there are all these different times people are coming in, and so that's our sort of our main meeting. And then we can schedule meetings during the week if you want. We have to work a little harder to find a time, but we can do that if we need to. So I know all of you are doing the internship in one way or another. Some of you are trying to do it for credit, some aren't, but it doesn't really matter. We're going to have basically the same experience. Now I want to tailor this to each of you in some way. So, if we'll cover things in the meetings, we'll cover things on Slack, and if you'll start kind of very generally. I know some of you have been looking through the Slack channels, but if you have any questions, raise them. And then, on a weekly basis, we want to kind of touch base with where people are. So in the first couple of weeks, you're going to be, kind of investigating things, thinking about things in your head, what you might want to do. And then if you don't, if there's something you want to try out, if there's something you want to talk about, you feel free to present something. It doesn't have to be really polished. It can just be like a 10-minute thing. You run through some slides. You say, this is my idea. This is what it is. And I try to be very, very soft. I try to be, with feedback, I try not to be too harsh because I know it's kind of dispiriting when you get harsh feedback. And, I want to make sure that it's more of a dialogue, if anything else. And so, this will lead you down the path somewhere where you can, sort of narrow those interests down to a single project. I don't want you to go, flail all over the place. Sometimes when you give people that opportunity to sort of explore, sometimes they take it too far. But I want people to really kind of think about because it can be overwhelming in the first week or two. But to try to kind of find something they really like, and then let's just kind of move with that and see where it goes. And I give you sort of the caveat that not everything is going to be successful on the first try. If you see something you think is really interesting, but maybe it doesn't have a lot of substance, maybe don't get tied to that idea too much. Sometimes it's just not workable. So we want to be practical, but we also want to be very active in our exploration. So, and then I guess the other thing I would say is that I've given some, and Jesse and I are both very accomplished at this sort of mentorship / knowing how to do research area. So we give talks in the meeting sometimes on this very topic. And it's not something you get anywhere else. I've not seen any papers that are really focused on this, or a lot of materials. I mean, there's some materials, but I think we're going to learn probably as much how to do research than doing research itself, which is good because that's something you'll need to know for your future. So, Jesse,
Yeah, I think
did you
that's a
have
pretty nice. I think that's a pretty nice. It's almost like they're sort of the main ongoings of the lab, which is research oriented for finding a specific project or a topic that you want to do. And there's also, I guess, like the education in the name part fits pretty well because it's sort of like also let's have sort of a meta discussion about what's going on and how to grow as a researcher or develop in that way. And that's something that I've always been interested in because, especially, I am a first generation person. I have no academic pedigree or background in people telling me what to do. So that's been a big deal for me, and something I was always aware of when I went back to school. And Bradly, maintaining and organizing the lab this way and giving opportunities this way has been really a nice space for that. And I feel like I've definitely had time and experience to grow and things to do in that context. So yeah, I think if you saw my intro video, I kind of said some of the same things, so I won't repeat myself. But one thing I'll say, I think Bradley might have a little more to say about internship stuff, but also we can probably just do a super general, like, hi, I'm Jesse, here's my story, and same thing for Bradley, because I don't know if many people have met Bradley yet or not, or like talked to them one-on-one yet. So it's like a, who are you kind of a thing. But before that, any initial questions on what was said so far? Some of it's kind of things we already mentioned, so it's okay. But yeah, would you like to say more about internship stuff now, or just do like a quick intro of yourself?
Yeah, why don't we do introductions first? I see that Shayan is also here, and I think they're going to be doing, I don't know if, I think they're interested in GSOC, so it's a little bit different interest, but like, we have people doing all sorts of things in the meetings, so, but why doesn't everyone introduce themselves? I'll start, and then we'll move on to the other things. So, I am Bradly Alicea. I am the head scientist of the Orthogonal Lab. I started this lab sort of, as I was finishing up my PhD, and then continuing on, ramping it up in the last several years. Really, the pandemic allowed us to ramp it up even more, and because there were a lot of people interested in that virtual experience. I have a background in kind of a really interesting background in cognitive science and computational biology. So I did both of those during my PhD years. And then back a long time ago, I was interested in biology and anthropology, actually as an undergrad. So I learned a lot, I had a pretty interdisciplinary experience even then. And, those things kind of go together more maybe than cognitive science and computational biology, but, I think that's an interesting combination. You get like a lot of quantitative skills, and then you also get some some tools sort of how to think, or looking at behavior, looking at things that are qualitative even in nature. And so those things, you can find a lot of interesting intersections when you study things that are sort of, the university considers to be separate, or they're in different bins. Usually, it's contrary to the way we usually think about these things. So I'm very well versed in interdisciplinary research, and we'll probably talk about that somewhat too in the mentorship, in the course of mentorship. So I'm always open. My door is always open, as they say. I'm on Slack. I'm easily reachable. We can set up meeting times. And so I hope this is a good experience for people. Please reach out if you have any questions or concerns, or if you want to talk about things like, interdisciplinary work or some of the things going on in the Slack channels. Thank you.
Yeah. Um, I don't. If you saw my intro video, you kind of know things, so I'll just say very briefly. I'm Jesse. I'm the lab manager here. I've been here since 2019. I joined through GSOC, or if you don't know what that is, Google Summer Code. I didn't participate directly in it, but I kind of came along as part of that incoming class and worked kind of on some adjacent projects, which is a cool thing. That it was a nice sort of way to get into it and finding out. I was graduating Albany in 2019 at the same time. I went back to school. I was a first generation non-traditional. I did undergrad beforehand at a different university at SUNY Geneseo, for the upstate New York people. But then I didn't fully graduate. I did some stuff in startup. I did like I was going to graduate with a degree in like international relations and the global economy, which is very different. As you can see, I'm kind of making a large shift away from that because I didn't want to do that as a career ultimately. And I enjoyed more tech and technical related things and found my way, wanted to go back to school and did a bunch of things in the meantime and have a lot of different experience with startups. So it's the startup, there's a broad conversation that I think we've addressed nice in the lab, which is like traditional brick and mortar academia, a new space developing between academia and public and private space, public research, private research, and like startup build your own company research. And like those are all, I have experience with all those areas, and Bradley had a lot of different things in those areas as well. So it's sort of a cool, I think we have a pretty good broad spectrum for that. And there's a lot of people here, there's a lot of people who aren't in the lab today who are, like Angela is kind of founding and dealing with a couple of her own project ideas right now too. She's in Germany, and there's a lot of people in the lab that are kind of directly or sort of external collaborators that are in a lot of different subfields. So if you have particular interests, we can help you build a network in that area. That's really cool. But since I've been in the lab, I became really interested in, I guess I found this is my first real home because I did in undergrad, I did like a hardcore tour of duty as much as possible, and I stayed extra longer to do research because I was working part-time in like a basic IT job, and on the intro video I talked about my first research, which was in like effective computing, which is pretty cool, with an engineering person, Dr. Young Kim. I also had, if you know any of these people from Albany, shout out to them. But in informatics, there was George Berg, Dr. Berg. He was formerly like a chair of like computer science and informatics stuff. He's an older guy who has a lot of things going on. He's done a lot of stuff with like Enable, the prosthetic hand people, or like volunteer creating those hands. Dr. Samimi, Annalisa Samimi in biology and neuroscience. I was in her lab for a year. I tried to help out with some computer stuff there. I'm not a pure biologist, but it was a fun experience to be like in the lab and do animal handling training and all that stuff, biosense. And I worked with David Shretsky in cybersecurity. Excuse me. I did like policy analysis with him. So I don't know a lot about cybersecurity technology, but that was a fun. All the stuff I did in Albany when I went back, and it was like a big broad swath, and I was like, that's cool, but I'm most interested in kind of what we talk about here in the lab. So it was a nice home for me. But yeah, that's kind of my background is very interdisciplinary, and I'm trying to get into school to study like computation and cognition. I really like things about metacognition, and I made this Cognition Futures research team, just kind of trying to look at some ways look at how maybe technology is affording some new frontiers in that sense, and what cognitive capacities can translate into like machine-related things right now or not. My original proposal in the lab for Google Summer Code was about toggling layers of like cognitive ability in a simulated agent or in like a developmental Brainberg vehicle. She might talk about all those things later. But that's kind of was my intro to the lab of like, oh, I saw a proposal and I was like, that's pretty cool. And, I think it's a great place to find your way and kind of be like, almost like if you're like a first year PhD student or a grad student, not that you have to be here, obviously, but like, there's a really important space from like, oh, I think I found this interesting in undergrad. Do I want to do a PhD in this area? I feel like you should really know before you apply to that. And we can have a whole discussion about applying to grad school or not. But I think this lab is a great space to find out a lot of those things. So that's my overview / plug / hint at things. And, anyone else would like to speak of themselves in flattering light?
I guess I can go.
Okay.
I don't know about flattering, but I'll do the best. Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm Brian McCorkle. I'm a second bachelor's student at uni at SUNY Albany or University of Albany or whatever they want to call it. I got my first bachelor's at University of Michigan in music and comparative literature at the beginning of this millennium. And while I was there, I studied with this guy, David Cope, who invented this thing called experiments in musical intelligence, which is this system that basically tries to recreate, it's an AI system that recreates music of composers. So you put in all their works and then it spits out new ones. And I took a workshop with him over the summer, and it got me just kind of obsessed with AI. But then I moved to New York City and had a life as running making operas and running a space for experimental performance called Panoply Performance Laboratory for almost a decade. So I've been involved in laboratory work, but the lab was kind of like a culture lab. So a lot of performance art and poetry and video and music and just everything kind of, just as long as it was something that had an experiment kind of source, like as its concept. That was kind of what we were going for. We were trying to make it so that art could do science, basically. I don't know if it really worked, but it was a lot of fun. And I got a few residencies to make some musical AI systems and kind of realized, wow, I think I need to go back to school and really learn more about this. So I'm planning to continue into grad school after my degree at Albany, which will be done next year. But I'm so excited to be here as part of this lab because I just really believe in what y'all are doing, and I love the idea that kind of we make research regardless of kind of a lot of the trappings that one can fall into when one is working institutionally. Like if you don't get the funding, you can't do the research, for example. I mean, I could go on. I think you guys speak really articulately about that in your material about the lab. So I really appreciate that, and I'm really excited to be here. I do have a short presentation on symbolic versus non-symbolic AI, which is something we talked about. I'm not sure if y'all want to see that today, but either way, really excited to be here, and thanks for having me.
Okay. Thank you. Why don't we go with Amanda next?
Hello. My name's Amanda. I studied cognitive science at the University of Michigan for my undergrad, and then I did a master's program in philosophy at Western Michigan. And I guess right now I've kind of, like, the master's program in philosophy very much tried to funnel you into a PhD in philosophy, but I am not sure that I want to do that. So I'm just interested in like what cognitive science research looks like right now. I have like a good theoretical background in like the philosophy of mind and philosophy of cognitive science. But I want to learn more about what, like specifically what can be learned through computational modeling. yeah, so I'm very excited to be a part of this project. I'm specifically interested in hearing more about this Cognition Futures team also. Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think that's good. That's a good fit. I think there's a lot of issues that we do vis-a-vis cognitive science. We did last year. We did a discussion group at Cognitive Science 2021 on trajectories in cognitive science. So that's actually something you might want to check out. I don't know if it's sort of in the Slack channel, which I told you to explore, which is kind of, you can't really get a lot out of it, like in terms of context, but that's something you'll want to review. We have like YouTube videos of the session, so it's like a number of speakers who talked on different topics. Jesse did a really nice talk on developmental cognitive science or developmental approaches. So we value a lot of different approaches to a topic. So like we might talk about development. We might talk about like computational methods. We might talk about inclusion and diversity. We might talk about some of the some other topics that are maybe less understood, like areas that people really haven't explored too much. And so we want to be able to. One of the things we do in this lab, because we're interdisciplinary, is how do you approach a topic that hasn't really been explored very much yet. So I don't know. There's probably something there that you might find like, oh yeah, that's an interesting take on it, and then you might want to produce like some sort of presentation on that area, and then if you do the research and you kind of frame the terms of it, you kind of own that area, and you can write, like, you can do a presentation, then you can move up to a paper, and then you've got an automatic sort of ownership. I don't want to say ownership, but like you have that area staked out, and so that's a good that's something you might want to think about. But yeah, definitely that's a good fit for the lab. Shaima, why don't you go next?
Okay. Hi, my name is Shayan, and I graduated back in 2020 in the Department of Mathematics. So, like, my course was Mathematics and Computing. After that, I went into a startup as a data scientist and worked for a year there. But like, I was more interested in the field of computational neuroscience, so I started doing some courses on that. So currently, I'm looking forward to do some research work or any interns related to that, so that it will kind of get me a better insight about what I want to do as my PhD. And so yeah, I'm really excited to be in this group, and really looking forward to the works of all the people, and might be contributing in that if possible.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, we have. What's that? Oh, well, we have a lot of opportunities here to, like, in data science, and then in like we have a GSOC project, which is actually an AI ethics, but it kind of spans out to like simulation, agent-based modeling, and some other areas. So, but there's always like opportunities for data science. We're trying to do some things with data sets. It's harder than it's something that we have to sort of provide we want to provide a solid footing on, but it's definitely something we have a collective interest in, with working with the secondary data sets, doing analyses, and then kind of making sure that they have standards to them. Like, you don't want to just dive in and do something and then it's not any good. So we want to enforce that sort of, those kind of standards for understanding how to analyze data and interpret it and all that. So, okay, Shaima, I know I said Shaima and Cheyenne went, and then, but if you could go.
Yeah, my name is Shaima Hussaini. I'm a freshman at SUNY Albany, and I'm currently majoring in computer science and minoring in biology. I'm mostly interested in like AI, machine learning, and that sort of thing. And I'm interested in like learning more about the neuroscience and organoids work you guys are doing and developmental AI. And this is like the first lab that I'm a part of, so I'm really excited to like learn all these skills that I think will be really important for me. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, great.
Great.
We talked about, or actually, we have a lot of things going on in that area. We've been working on trying to do the organoids. I know that one of our members is trying to set up a wet lab in organoids. So organoids are these populations of cells that people grow, and they sort of mimic organs like the brain or like the liver or things like that, and they can use them as experimental platforms. So you can't really take a human brain and do things with it that living human brain. So you can what you can do is you can grow something that looks like a brain that functions sort of like a brain in certain ways and do experiments on them. So that's a there of course there are ethical issues, but there are also a lot of issues with how do you actually do that. And we've been actually working on sort of our approach to this has been both kind of maybe looking at how to do data analysis on some of the output data, maybe getting into some wet lab biology, and then also what is the landscape of organoids? It's like the cognitive science thing. What's the landscape that's there? What are people doing? What are the opportunities there? So yeah, definitely. And then the CS bio, I think that's a nice combination because it's, there's always the opportunity to analyze biological data like we talked about with Shayan. And there are all sorts of biological data sets to explore that are available publicly. So it's not like we don't have access to that. The key is to get the right type of data, to get it in the right context, and then, to say something useful about it, not just here's a nice analysis that we did, which is nice, but it doesn't mean anything to anyone. So, those are kinds of things, that sort of research process allows you to think about. And ultimately, you would, if you're successful, you're going to be able to spot a problem and say, I know how to solve that. I know what data I want to use. I know what to say roughly about it if I get a certain result. So, that's the type of intuition we kind of want to build. So, finally, Samantha.
Hi everyone, I'm Sam. I'm a current junior at UAlbany. I'm double majoring in cybersecurity and software development. And I guess my background with artificial intelligence comes from doing a lot of research with it. Because I have, when I started school, I had this love of coding and I liked it. And then I started taking more research classes and started liking researching a bit more now that I've started to discover. So doing papers on artificial intelligence connecting with sign language and automating jobs, that started me thinking more about technology in the future. And I'm really excited to be here and meet all of you, finally put faces to names and just be here too. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you. So yeah, we we have a lot of opportunities. We do a lot of things with agents. We do some things with machine learning. We have a couple people in the group who are interested in just hardcore machine learning, reinforcement learning, that sort of thing. And then we have another group of people who are interested in agent-based learning. So it's like Bradenburg vehicles, which I think some of you have seen that channel. And then also agent-based modeling, which is where you have a population of agents and you simulate them, and then you get some output data. You put them in a scenario where they interact with each other with some resources, and you get this data that you can analyze. So we have all those kinds of things that we do, and so that's again, we have tools that we've kind of scoped out. We have ideas that we've scoped out, but definitely if you have an idea of a problem you want to solve, and this goes for everyone. If you have an idea of a problem you want to solve, and you kind of go through your materials and you say, I have 2 or 3 problems that I'm interested in, or questions that I'm interested in solving. Just reading, a lot of times when you just read and go through materials, things, you understand what's going on, but then, sometimes maybe you don't, or sometimes something seems odd to you or interesting and you have a question. And that's what you really want to get to, is the question. So this applies to like any project in the lab or anywhere in the world, really. You'll say, well, what about this relationship between these two things? Or what about this thing that, is maybe no one's ever asked it, or I couldn't figure it out from the literature. That's the kind of thing maybe you want to highlight and bring up and say, this is maybe a potential good question. And then, we'll talk about it a little bit, and maybe other people will know, because you're all from very different backgrounds. Some people will know, oh, that sounds like something I've seen before. Or this sounds like it could be, like we have a lot of times we have people who do like hardcore machine learning, and they're familiar with a lot of methods, and we have other problems in the lab from other people, and they might be able to fit a model to the data, or at least give some idea of what that would look like as a formal, sort of posed as a formal problem. So like, some problem in behavior, well, it kind of looks like a reinforcement learning. But then, if you, like, we also have people who are interested in the brain, you might say, well, that's maybe good, but there's another set of things to consider from neuroscience. And then, we kind of work it back and forth, and then we get a nice, synthetic answer that is maybe some new ground that we can break. So that's the idea. And I think, if you have this sort of interaction between different people with different backgrounds, it makes that job easier. So thank you for introducing yourselves. Jesse, you want to say something?
Just to plug, we'll talk about this more a bit later, but anybody who's interested in, it may not be a direct crossover from cybersecurity, but nobody's obligated to participate in this, but there's going to be a lot of opportunity to do so. At New York Celebration of Women in Computing, or NICWIC sometimes it's called, we were accepted again this year, which is great. But there's a lot, we're doing a specific topic. We have like a presentation segment on like data ethics and tech ethics. I forget the title of it, but there's a lot of things to look into in terms of maybe security and like tech usage in that area. For anyone who's interested in that kind of like an applied area, that's more about that later, but just kind of a plug for that. And I'm fortunate enough where I'll put it this way. We've had an interest in it for a long time in the lab, to have kind of a focus on like AI ethics or tech ethics or related stuff. But there's been a really nice push, and kind of in the start of the year, in kind of concert with that conference, NICWIC, there's a little bit of a push in that direction. So nobody, like I'm not trying to bring everybody into that because you don't have to. But if there's anything that you see that applies to what you want to do in that area, feel free to just mention it to me, or there'll be opportunities to talk to some other people. Like Angela, I don't think Angela will be here today, but she will have a major part in that. Erin has done a lot of work with some other things. We'll talk about it later, but yeah. It's great to see everybody and put names to faces and hear who you are. I said this in the intro video too, I think, but like, I think we're pretty laid back. Like there's no pressure to be on camera, especially all the time. So if you're not feeling up or whatever, that you're here and that you're paying attention to discussing, that's great. And like we said, the meeting will probably go around 2 hours, but there's zero expectation that you have to stay the whole time, especially if you're just here for a part of it that's like relevant to your project and something comes up, that's fine. We mostly just ask that you stay in contact, especially on Slack. And anytime, I think everyone here is that way. I think Amar is who I'm going to be meeting with Monday, because she can't come today. But anytime you want to schedule a meeting, or if you would like to have a regular, hey, Jesse or Bradley or both of them or something, like Wednesday nights at 7 p.m. is a great time for me personally, or not me. I mean, like if it's a great time for you and you like to have a regular check-in, like a 20-minute, hey, here's what I did this week. Here's my question that's separate from the big, because things can be lost. You may want to say something in this chat, in the main chats, or in Slack, or in this group meeting. That's fine. Just say, hey, I'm free Wednesday night. Could we have a meeting? That's very normal and very acceptable. And, you know, just really want to emphasize that's like a totally fine thing, because we don't, I'm not in UAlbany campus and you can't come to my office hours or whatever, but there are essentially office hours available. And we used to even have a specific like open office hour or hack hour at like noon Fridays Eastern time, but that's maybe not, because if there happens to be a time that works for everybody to have an open office hour where we can all be around, that's great, but that's probably not likely given we're all so dispersed and so many things going on. So just as much as possible, the virtual door is open, and come in and knock or say, hey, can I talk whenever you want? So I think I made that overly clear, but just to put it out there again.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Anything else that you want to say, Bradly?
So yeah, I know that Brian wants to present on his the symbolic subsymbolic thing, and we'll do that in a little bit. Before that, though, I wanted to get into some things that we do. So we do a lot of well, first of all, we have some materials that maybe people would be interested in. You don't have to. This isn't something you'll be involved with immediately, but it's something you'll want to know about. And this day. This first meeting might be kind of a, what they call an information dump, and like drinking from a fire hose is the analogy. And sometimes the meetings can be like that. So, it's like you sit there and people dump information on you and you have to synthesize it. It's, first of all, it's not like you don't have to get every piece of information out of it. You can just follow along, and whatever is interesting to you, that's great. If there are things that really pop up as interesting, that's wonderful. But also we you can go back and review the recordings or whatever, and that's always good. We try to internal in the Slack, we try to point to different parts of different meetings where people presented on things, and so those things we try to annotate that content as much as possible so people can get there might be some pop-up conversation about something, or like someone gives a presentation, we can just point people to that, and that'll be useful. But I want to talk about, so we do a lot of different activities. We have the Slack. Actually, there's some things in the chat. Okay, that's we already reviewed that. So let me share my screen. And so we have this onboarding guide, and it hasn't really been completed, but this is something that you might want to review. Let me see. I'll put this in the chat here. So this is the onboarding guide. And this is a guide that kind of gives an overview. I've given a couple talks on the lab and its structure. So this presentation will give you a nice background into what's going on, some of the projects. So this is this is our logo here. We're on LinkedIn. We have a Medium, which is like a blog. We have a Twitter account, which is where we sometimes publicize papers or talks, conference talks, things like that. And then we usually have a review of the meeting sometimes. We have a GitHub account, so if you're doing coding or working with data, you'll be using GitHub as a means to do archiving or working with code. We have, of course, a YouTube channel, and then we have a website, which I'll show in a little bit here. But I wrote a paper. It was during the 2020, so it was sort of at the beginning of the pandemic, about the sort of the philosophy behind the lab. This is the distributed and enabling computational laboratory. So this is the way I describe what we're doing here. And so we do a lot of computational work. We do, this is enabling the people being able to do it both like in many geographical locations, but also virtually in the way we do it. And this enables people to do, all sorts of different things that they wouldn't be able to do normally. Maybe that's because you don't have the resources in your place, or because, just being in a single place is limiting in terms of who you can talk to. Sometimes it's distributed across disciplines, so you wouldn't necessarily talk to a physicist and an anthropologist and a computer scientist in the same place, but here you can maybe do that. So the name Orthogonal Lab is where you have this is what an orthogonal plane looks like. So it's, it has this set of planes set at right angles. So you have things that are set at like 90 degrees to one another. So you can see that these three planes are like that. And so in statistics, it also refers to statistically independent events. So this idea of like interdisciplinarity, I kind of have organized it in terms of orthogonality. So if you can think of this dark blue plane is physics, this light blue plane is like anthropology, and this yellow plane is like maybe something like AI ethics or something. Those things would be nominally orthogonal. They don't really talk to each other very much, but you have these unions where people do talk to one another. And so these are areas that are the most fertile, I think, for intellectual development and research. And so that's where we kind of bring those planes into the same space, as it were. So that's the idea behind the name. And then, talk about how we deal with things like collaboration. How do we send messages? How do we build from that to like some sort of presentation or presentation of ideas? How do we build from that to like research artifacts, which are papers or conference presentations or things like that? It's a process that we try to keep, what they call open, which means that we don't usually like to put them behind a paywall. We like to make them accessible to people. That being said, we do, if there's things that we want to keep private, that's fine. But that's something that, we have the option to open things up as we want people to have access to them. This is opposed to, of course, the closed access model, which is what has been the tradition in academia, which is where people keep things closely tight, close to their vest, and they don't share information or data, and they don't have they might put their work in a journal that no one can access. And so that's not necessarily a good thing. So there's a philosophy behind that as well. And so this gives us this pipeline of different things that we can do. This is an older version of this, but basically it goes from ideation to like different artifacts to, publishing these on different platforms and working collaboratively. And so it's a nice, we can kind of map that out, and it helps people understand how this process works. So, 2020 was the first year of the pandemic. So before the pandemic, we were kind of a small group. I would take on student mentees, and I would, work on projects, and it was a pretty low stakes affair. During when the pandemic hit, a lot of people were trying to do research online. So I scaled up, and Jesse's helped me with this a lot because he was involved with the group before the pandemic hit. So he was there. And we've really kind of expanded it out. We had resources like Neuromatch Academy and the Neuromatch conferences that have helped us to kind of get our work out there and get people, there's more of this mentality now that this is a possible thing. So people are more accepting of it. You were going to say something, Jesse?
Oh, I just reiterating what you said. Nothing new, really. So,
okay.
Go on.
Yeah. So this little table here reminds me of some things. We have been able to scale this up we've modified it a bit, but the model works well, pretty much. We've moved from focusing on some select collaborations to topical projects with some cross. The we do a lot of topical projects, but the key to the lab is the crossover. So if you have like a topical project, like say Cognitive Futures or Cognition Futures and AI ethics, if you go between those projects, that's where the most interesting stuff is going to happen. So, you have these projects that emerge from people's interests, and then we like to cross over in that space. So that's really the key. And then we have a lot of partnerships. So we're working with the Open Room Foundation, which is there's a lot of computational biology going on there, a lot of computational neuroscience, INCF, which is also sort of neuroinformatics. So if you're interested in data analysis in the brain, or the brain and computational biology, there are opportunities there. We have Neuromatch, which is the academy where you can learn about computational neuroscience in a box, basically is the way they put it. And they have a lot of different lectures and tutorials from experts in the field. And so you can go there and you can get access to these for free. And so this is another thing that's really enabled us in the education sphere. And then there are other groups that we work with. We work with Plot Twisters, we work with the Rockwire Initiative, which I'll talk about some other time. And so we try to maintain these partnerships with different groups of people so we can, expand our reach, so we don't have to do everything here. And it gives us students opportunities to do other things as well, get more exposure to different areas. So we have different, our people have gone through the lab or are in the lab now, have different backgrounds, different interests. So we have people who are like Stefan, who's from Germany. He did a Google Summer of Code. He built this platform called Broadgen Brain, which is like a developmental Bradenberg vehicle model where, you can grow brains in an agent, and then he's evolving brains in an agent, and then they are in this agent-based model, and then you can collect data on what's happened to those brains as they've developed in an environment with using an agent, an embodied agent, to interact with the environment. So it's very interesting. That software is open source. So, I've been thinking recently of how we can develop it more, because it's a nice piece of software, but we don't, one part of open source is getting people to continue to work on things and sustain them. So that's something. Jesse, of course, from New York. He's interested in lab management and cognition futures and AI ethics. So, again, our group supports people with very diverse interests. Rishikesh Kulkarni, who's from India, he's interested in computational culture. I collaborated with him off and on for a couple years, and he's doing his graduate work now. So, I haven't talked to him in a while, but we've put out a couple papers on looking at culture and, using computational models to look at things like book readership and some other areas as well. So, Shruti.
Can I ask if he?
Yeah.
Was he before or after Sam Felder in like the Google stuff?
I think about the same time.
Or was he unrelated to that?
No, I think he was
Okay.
at about the same time. Yeah. And then Shruti, who's also from India, is interested in deep learning, cellular automata, AI ethics. Rob Stone, who's been really since the beginning of the group, and he's from Metro Detroit, and he's interested in cybernetics and the philosophy of science. And, we've written some papers. All these people, I think, have written papers with their authors on papers. And so it's you come in with some interests. Maybe they're offbeat interests, or maybe they're very diverse. And, we can maybe find some resources and write papers and do things that are collaborative. And, really there's the opportunity here is limitless. Sometimes you get really nice marquee work. Sometimes it's just like experience with something, but we try to accommodate people in different ways as much as possible. So, there's synergies between the interest groups, that's key. And then we have this laboratory contribution philosophy where you go through and you you start very small, you make an early defined contribution. So like I was saying about like posing questions or a small short presentation, then you do the work and you either fail or succeed at that. So failure is important to understand, as it's not a stopping point. It's like a rebooting point, maybe, where you have like you fail, and if you fail, then you have to understand why you failed, and then you sort of reshape your project or the thing that you're doing until you succeed. And this really depends on your mentor being patient and helping you with feedback. And then once you get there, once you work those bugs out, then you get this redefined contribution, which is maybe a lot bigger than what you originally posed, but it's more focused and more focused towards success. And then, and I'm not going to talk about how we define success, but and then this leads to things like authorship or documentation of software or something. And then there's external collaboration. So you release it into the world, people read it, give you feedback, and it's a nice. We've done this with the Neuromatch conference where people have worked through ideas, and then they get to the conference and they present it, and then it's can be well received, and it feels really good to be well received like that. Sometimes your contributions go from like a single thing, like like an online talk, and then it blossoms into something like a blog post, another refined online talk, maybe even like a rotation in another lab, or something like that. So when you start small, sometimes you can end up in pretty nice big places. So we have our coordination with our meetings. We have synchronous and asynchronous coordination. And that's all I'm going to say. So that's our onboarding guide. This is our GitHub organization. So I have the link for that. Yeah, INCF is International Neuroinformatics Coordinating Facility. So this is our GitHub organization. So some of you will be joining this, some of you don't really care so much, but I would invite anyone, if you have a GitHub account, let me know and I can put you in as a collaborator. And we have different repositories here where we keep information. We have different types of, we have code in here. So I think we need to update this though, because this is not actually I'd like to update it with the current versions of different software, but we have like a lot of our projects are here, and this is just like the code for them, which is it's not, won't necessarily help you understand it, but this is where we like to be transparent and have open code, and so this is where this will be. So if you're working on, say for example, like an agent-based model or a data analysis, say in R or in Python or something, or with a lab, a collab notebook or something, this would be the place you'd be pushing to and hosting it on. So you'd have like a place where you could host, and people have hosted collab notebooks where they come up with a really nice analysis. And the advantage to a collab notebook is that you can put everything out, people can run it right on the internet, and you don't have to worry about it's all transparent. They can see how something works, and you can that's expected in publications now, that you have things like that are transparent and that people can go to, run through the code and understand it. So that's our GitHub organization. Now we have our website, which is the main website. This is, I know it's hosted on Weibo, but this will lead you to a lot of the different places. We have people and collaborations. We have our projects, the project websites, which are of some value in terms of understanding what's going on. But again, it's very much like the outputs of the project or descriptions. In any case, we have a lot of people here, and we have different things for engagement, like Google Summer of Code. We also we have some things that are off the Slack, like we have a Discord for critical periods and development. So that's something, if you're interested in development or developmental AI, that you might want to join. We also do some work in virtual reality, which is not, we don't have a website for that, but we have it's part of this engagement. And then we have different things in the, different features that we have on here. If we go to the one of the projects, and I'll talk about two of them. The first one is this representational brains and phenotypes. And this project is where we have, we talk a lot about agent-based simulations and things like that. So you can see we have a Bradenburg vehicle here, and then this kernel with circles in it, which is something called a contextual geometric structure. And so these are some of our agents that we've published on or published talks on, things like that. So here's the link for that. That website has a lot of this stuff hosted on it. We have, this is also the cultural modeling that I talked about with Rishikesh, some other things. And then we have some educational resources where, people can go and learn more about this. We have a curriculum for brains, behavior, and complexity, which is something that people are interested in learning more about, like the Neuromatch thing, which is computational neuroscience and deep learning, or about artificial life, which is a whole set of approaches to simulate life. And it's sort of like joined at the hip with cognitive science, because artificial life people are also interested in cognition, but from sort of a more biological perspective. But, there are tutorials on that. We have tutorials on complexity theory from the Santa Fe Institute, on network science, on data science. So all these topics are important. And what we've tried to do here is sort of break them out. So if you're interested in this project, these are the types of things that if you find you have a deficiency in, if you don't understand some concept, and there are a lot of concepts you're going to find that you don't understand very well, you can go to these resources. They're usually YouTube videos, or they're talks, maybe they're slideshows, and you can go through and you can read about it a little bit. And that gives you, again, that extra reach that you need to understand these things. And then the second project is Cognition Futures. This is Jesse's, Jesse manages this project. So we have, we did our CogSci 2021 discussion group on this, which is, this is just a link to the discussion group page. But this is the interim website for the project. This is in Notion. So this is the website.
When I first started doing research and looking at academia, I'm like, boy, why do people make websites the way that they do? Because they're sort of it's they never really seem fully up to date. And now that I'm where I am in the process of it, yes, I would love to have all of my websites perfectly up to date and looking really cool. So it's sort of this sense of bear with me.
Yeah.
That process. And then even when the old legacy oral website is it's a lot of configurations and reorganizations that maybe weren't completely done. It's so yeah. But yeah, this is sort of this was last updated fully for the major event, relatively, at CogSci 2021, which is really cool. I was with the group State of the Art AI at the time. I was part of their. I was heavily involved with them, let's say, during last year, and we kind of used them as part of a discussion about how to look at frontiers in research, and they're focused on AI papers specifically. But it was a great little event that we did there, and we can talk more about it at some other point. But this is sort of a. Ideally, I would love to be updating this. I know Amanda's particularly interested in this, and I think I'll probably be scheduling a specific discussion with her about that. But if you're interested in kind of, yeah, okay, some of our older projects and ideas, maybe this would be a nice opportunity to say this. So just keep, that's a great screen to show right here, Bradley. A lot of this, when I first joined the lab, a really interesting event that happened for me was we were talking, an ongoing conversation in the lab is sort of under this category of what we call epistemological directories. And how do you kind of create, this is all like really, really, I would say imperative for like new developments in sciences or in areas of research. So like, how do you categorize or have a taxonomy or even just collect and store your data or ways of talking about things? And there was an event, I think, did we say it there? Not there, but like at like CSV. There was a conference about this topic about organizing your data and how to store it or think about it or talk about it or convey it. And there's like CSV conference 5 or something.
Yeah.
And we had a discussion where we talked about epistemological directories and a bunch of things. And one of my specific brain ideas was a frontier map. And I'm actually working very slowly on a preprint about this specific topic, because frontier mapping it's kind of a very broad thing that anybody does in a situation. But I'm really like sort of the meta conversation of how do you map a frontier. You can kind of see something behind me here. It's unrelated to that. But how do you like bring someone, especially someone who is early career or newer, how do you bring someone to a field of study and, like Bradley mentioned, all the orthogonal overlapping points of maybe classical disciplines and mentioning space in between them, but like, how do you bring someone to give a sense of the landscape and say, okay, here's an outlook, and like give a sense of maybe the trajectory that's been developing alongside, like in cognitive science, there's a trajectory of psychology or language or anthropology, and sort of cognitive science is sort of this integrative attempt, and did it actually work into a cognitive science or not is a whole question. But how do you even try, before you even get to that, but how do you even like say, hey, here's an outlook or a vantage point, and here's some really key decision points that have been made in the research along the way. Here's sort of the edge of where people are at. What are people trying to stem off into this direction, that direction? What are the debates? So like, how do you even try to convey that? And that's kind of where frontier map, my concept, came from. And in essence, Cognition Futures is a frontier map of cognitive science and my particular interest in cognitive science and artificial intelligence, and in terms of what's going on, I guess, according to my own whims and flavor. But like there's sort of an art of how do you make a frontier map for yourself, and how do you make one maybe for like, Cognition Futures is sort of an attempt at demarcating what those lines are in terms, And so, as underneath that, there's a few different projects that have happened. Like a survey of computational models of cognition kind of has been on the back burner for a while, but that was trying to like legitimately document some, okay, here's what are you modeling what are you computationally modeling, and what's an existing way to do that. And like, there's sort of a reboot of that I'm interested in working on, if people are interested in doing that in right now or not. You don't have to, but I would really love to start basically creating a taxonomy or a catalog of, here's a specific element of cognition, or metacognition particularly, and what, if any, is there any computational equivalent now, or what could it look like? And there's a lot of things that are going into, next generation AI and hybrid models, and there's a discussion about deep learning versus symbolic AI, and what do you want to do in that space, and so on and so forth. But like, in one sense, if anybody wants like in the most simplest form, if anybody wants to join the Cognition Futures project and team, and you just want to start documenting aspects of cognition and looking like one of the first steps right now is just creating a larger database of cognitive functionality, I suppose, and from there building on it and maybe doing some computational or methodological investigations into it to just kind of see, okay, what is this sort of arena and where are things going with it. And there's a lot of things in terms of like, there's a whole conversation to have at some other point, like what Meta or Facebook is doing right now. Like they're really trying to collect a lot of things in terms of first person video footage, and they want to train their AIs on trying to get their new take on an AI that can teach itself. And Jan LeCun's very interested in like unsupervised or self-supervised learning, and this first-person view of learning. And there's a whole bunch of things going with that are really cool to think about. There's a lot of bridges into, and this isn't directly Cognitive Futures related, but just kind of see some things that may be happening in the lab or around the lab. A lot of interest in like how virtual reality or extended reality affects cognitive capacity or can enhance it. That's something I really want to look into, but I haven't really had the time yet. But Bradley's done some work in virtual reality in the past already, which is very cool, and I kind of want to follow up on that too. And just depending on where you fall in terms of like coding, technical versus just wanting to understand cognitive science, there's a wide range of like applications for what we could be focusing on, what you could develop a project or a semester long thing about. So that's kind of my preview for that stuff. But we can move on too. So thank you, Bradley.
Yeah. Hello, Erin. And we have.
Oh, Erin.
Yeah. So.
I woke up.
Well, great. Nice to see you. We're talking about, we have a lot of new people here. We have some interns starting. So, welcome, Erin.
Yeah, welcome to everybody who's new. It's really good to see you here.
Yeah. Erin does she has a lot of interests in like AI ethics and some of the other things we talk about. So if you are interested in the AI ethics channel, she'll be in there. She'll be maybe some other channels as well. And, just so you know who that is. So great. So the other thing I wanted to talk about was our submissions. So we talked about the GitHub organization earlier. One of the things we do in there is it serves as a baseline for some of our issue tracking. So we do a lot of issue tracking. So what kinds of issues are we tracking? So some of them are like project related. If you want to do pieces of a project, they come into play. Another thing we do is we track submissions to conferences and paper, special issues of journals and things like that. So I've created this spreadsheet of opportunities for like submissions. So every time we come up with a opportunity, see something, we try to add it to this, we review it in the meetings. And this is one way we can like facilitate our contributions to outside of the lab. So, things move pretty fast in the lab. We have weekly meetings, we have our Slack, and then, we keep working weekly on these things to try to get them out by these deadlines. That means that the projects move fast because we're always kind of pushing, and we have these things that we're kind of pushing things out into the world for. So, we can maybe work on a part of a project where, this New York celebration of women in computing, for example, which is now, what is the deadline for, when is this happening, Jesse?
The event itself is April 8 to 9.
Okay. So
it is April 8th to 9th. Yes, of this year.
Yeah, so this is
we got accept. I found out this on immediately after sending out all of the acceptance emails. I got or like the invite to the lab emails. I got notification that, oh, there was this whole, I was a bit concerned because the deadline was passed for them to tell us stuff. And I'm like, oh, we didn't get in this year. But it was a nice, we've been there for a long time, and I know some of the founders. If you're at UAlbany, you might have even heard about it, especially if you're around like Jennifer Goodall, Dr. Goodall, or George Berg, or some of the informatics or cybersecurity stuff. A lot of really cool overlap. Or what is it? IEEE or ACM and ACMW. ACM is the Association for Computing Machinery. They're big. Go to them because they have the money. You hear that a lot. But like, they're a large group, and they actually support the New York Celebration of Women Computing Conference. So yeah. Anyway, really happy that we're working with them again this year. More about that later.
Yeah. So I mean, the point here is that we have all these events that we identify, and then we submit things to them. Sometimes we don't. I mean, like this CogSci main track, we didn't submit to, but I didn't think we had anything for that. So sometimes we'll miss things. Sometimes we'll hit them. But the point is that we want to have a pipeline of things, and then we want to work towards those submissions. So sometimes it's a paper, sometimes it's an abstract. This helps you kind of focus the mind, because if you just kind of talk about ideas, sometimes they end up in the ether and they go away, and nothing ever happens. But if you talk about things and then think about them and then have a target, so say I want to get out 300-word abstract for this NetSci 2022 conference by March 11th, which is something we're going to do, then this focuses us to say, what's the abstract look like? What's the title? Let's get that out. And then if you meet the deadline, then you have another deadline of, okay, now I need to produce a talk. So with the New York Celebration of Women in Computing, we had the abstract. Now we have to have a talk by April 8 to 9. And so now Jesse will be soliciting slides from people, and then, we'll be getting something together by then. And then, you have something out in the world, as I said before, that you can now build on. So you have a talk at this conference, you can put it on your CV, and then you can say, well, the next step is to write maybe a paper, or the next step is to do another talk that's different a little bit, and we're at another venue. And so you can build upon this in this way. It drives the projects forward, and it drives your sort of research forward. So
yeah. Could I say a little something about that too?
Yeah. Right.
Even you can go back to the slide sheet if you want. Either way.
Yeah.
But just for example, one of the events, because just to kind of put this out in as how would you benefit from this? Because I could totally see someone coming to the lab thinking, oh, I'm not that familiar with research. What do I do here? How do I have a deliverable? How do I have a result? What am I doing? So just as a very potential likely thing that could happen. And I'm just going to use one of these events as an example. If you see the We Robot, which is number 6, and then how that's the deadline is March 1st. We Robot, our initial abstract or submission is due at that point, and I'm pretty sure we're going to do something like that, and that'll be happening in the next couple of weeks. But if you joining as an intern right now, contribute to the abstract and work on it through the next few weeks of your time here. I'm just going to speak in semesters, because I know some people really want to stay in the summer, or won't be able to do a whole lot until later in the year, which is fine. It's kind of your membership is based on how involved you want to be. So we're not going to kick you out if per se, but if you want to be active here during your time here, and this is obviously if you're doing it for credit, then there's slightly different, there's more expectations. But in general, my point here is if you come to the lab and you contribute to a project, let's say we get accepted to We Robot. We Robot the conference itself is not until I think September or October, and it's in Seattle. So you may not go to that conference specifically, or maybe you take a job or you graduate in May or in summer or something. That's fine, but you were very good about giving people credit and authorship and involvement. So even if you, let's say we either have a conference presentation or a poster presentation there, or it turns into a paper, you will still get things to put on your CV from that experience if you sufficiently contribute or involved in it. Even though there's a deadline in March, and there's several months of developing and fleshing things out if we get accepted, and then a final presentation in September for that event. And I want to explicitly say that because for people, I had no clue about this sort of timeline and the way things work in like higher level or like real world academia stuff. Because sometimes when you go to a lab in undergraduate, it's like, okay, hey, Jesse, I want you to organize this data set and read these papers. And it's like, that's cool. And that's not a bad thing. That's where we all start. And that's what it's about. But like, there's also this external world deadline driven, opportunity driven thing. And there's publish and perish, which is its own glory, wonderful thing, or horror, terrible thing, depending on how you want to go about it. But there's also just like the rush and the imperativeness of the deadlines that are at hand. And I think, as Bradly said, there's an art to, hey, I have this idea, it's kind of streaming with this opportunity, let's merge them and go off in the future and build that way. And that's kind of the rhythm of it. So it's a little, it feels very art over science at times in terms of balancing all that, but like that's kind of what it's going to be like, especially if you go further down the research path. Like that's, so this is sort of an introduction to that whole stuff. Anyway, let's continue. Thank you.
Yeah, so it's very much this idea of fractional scholarship, where you put in the time that you can, and then you get involved in things, and then you get a credit, and then you can, like the people I showed, some of those people, like Rob, he comes in and out. He actually, I think, is a high school teacher in his real day life, and then when he has time off, he does stuff here. So it's like wherever you can fit in. The internship's a little more intense, but in general, that's the kind of we're very receptive to that model. Now, Jesse, I don't need to show it today, but you've developed taking from like those deadlines and things like that to what we call issue tracking in GitHub, which is where you create issues and you track them over time. And then Jesse's actually integrated that with some tools that visualize that. So sometimes in the meetings, we'll go over these timelines where it'll show different projects and their progress. And so we do that. We're not going to do it today, but we can do it, to see where we are in a project, to see, where we need to be. So that'll be helpful as well.
Yeah, I can really quickly show a very simple preview of that. It's a little, this current version is a bit outdated, but just to kind of give you this is a really easy snapshot that I can show that's from October. So let me just, this is current. So there's a whole sidebar, like if you ever want to get really nerdy in a project management sense, I'm your guy. But it really can clog up a main meeting, so I try not to talk about it unless the audience is up for it. But there's I've been looking at all, because in one of my other groups, as Bradly says sometimes, in one of my other jobs, I'm a project information manager there, and how do you deal with the workflow of research and tasks that have to happen, and who to call and what to do. But for me, where do we go? Here's an example in Notion of what one of our calendars looked like last year in October. We had a whole bunch of stuff happening. We had, what was this, IS for SI?
Oh, that was the Information Science Conference. So it was biological.
It was biological something.
Inspired cognitive architectures,
That was a workshop. I forget if we attended or got into
Yeah,
that
we
too.
did. It was a presentation.
That's fun. You can kind of see the timeline about like these are kind of set to like due dates or submission dates. We had A-like manuscript we're working on to get a special issue. I was at the career fair last year around this time. There was a reading club that I didn't get to fully attend that we put on the calendar here. Neuromatch 4, there was actually a conference. There were originally 3 Neuromatch conferences in the first year, and then they finally did a 4th one the next year, which is great. And the reading group, which I'm actually attended this week also. This is kind of one of the things that we have here. There's a version of this in GitHub too, and then also ZenHub, which is a nice overlay. But just like there's ways to kind of keep track of all of that. And then what else was I going to show here? Really, I'm going to be making a presentation about this soon. It won't be today, but I don't know. Were you planning to mention this at some point today, Bradley?
We can talk about next week. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. We're kind of short on time, so upcoming discussion about specific ways you can contribute. We kind of mentioned all these things already, but just a little more in depth about them up ahead. So back to
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, I really we'll do that next week, but I didn't want to spend a lot of time like in the first meeting, like getting real. I mean, we're in the details, but like, okay. So I guess we can move to Brian. Brian has a presentation.
Thank you all for 80 minutes so far.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah. I mean, yeah, we'll have a lot of people. Ideally, we have a lot of people presenting things, so we want to be able to switch. Go through them all. And so, Brian, why don't you share your screen? Do you know how to do that, or in Jitsi?
Yeah, sure. May I say though, I am very interested in learning more about these ways of these kind of pipelines or workflows that you guys have set up for contributing and working on papers and things. So this is super helpful. It's not.
Yeah. No, that's great.
Not helpful. So okay, let's see. And I think this is a great idea to have somebody just present something that they're interested in. So this is a very quick thing. Can you see that now that it's full screen?
Oh yeah, it's perfect.
And definitely proof of quick flash talks. That's awesome. We'd like to have those about any topic. So this is great. There's only a few slides that I saw. I was like, great, that's totally fine. So looking forward to it.
Great. Yeah, it's very short. Nothing fancy. Because it's such a complicated topic. One could, there are several books and series of articles and all sorts of stuff about this topic, but my ideas for research mostly involve either a hybrid approach to artificial intelligence, or really it came out of discussions with a friend who's a PhD student at RPI, whose research is trying to he's in the cognitive science department and is trying to really nail down exactly what John Searle and others mean when they say that neural nets have a black box, or as Searle would say, like a Chinese room kind of quality, this idea that you don't know exactly what's happening in there. So, all right, let me get started though, because obviously neural nets would fall in this categorization scheme into non-symbolic categories. So, first of all, what is symbolic and what is non-symbolic artificial intelligence? A very, very short presentation. We'll start with symbolic or classical AI. I made a Lisp joke up there in the corner, but basically people like John McCarthy and Marvin Minsky and a lot of the founders of AI work primarily symbolically, which basically, if you look at this Lisp joke code, if you wanted to make a program like ELIZA, you would literally tell the program, if you're talking to a human and they say that they're sad, they mention that they're sad, you either say, I'm sorry, you're sad, or often ELIZA specifically most famously was programmed to just kind of repeat exactly what they were saying back to them in an attempt to make them analyze their own speech and their own problems. So it's a good example of a symbolic AI. I'm just going to read my slide. Artificial intelligence was originally conceived of as requiring a symbol manipulation language hand-built by humans. Hand-built as opposed to what Jan LeCun and others would describe as non-supervised. A really fun example that I don't think gets mentioned enough, at least around people that I talk to about AI, is Psychor. I just love this idea. Douglas Lennett in 1984, getting all the logicians and computer scientists that he could find to hand code what common sense is into an AI system. It's largely regarded as a failure, but it's something I think is super interesting, and taking this symbolic approach to its fullest conclusion. Like, if we're going to make AI that's general, we're going to have to tell it everything about the world. So that's pretty fascinating. But this is a super quick description of what symbolic or classical AI is. What about subsymbolic, non-symbolic, or statistical AI, or deep learning? I have it as an example of simple TensorFlow ConfNet in a diagram by Marvin Minsky about a single layer perceptron. Just for fun, really. I'm not really going to use that. But let me read this slide. Though conceived in the 50s by psychologist Frank Rosenblatt, after Minsky and Peppert's book Perceptrons in 1969, the approach of neural nets, or simple neural nets, or perceptrons more specifically, was mostly abandoned. That book is a lot of fun. In 2012, Alex Krzyzewski was this grad student who basically applied graphics processing units to AI models, enabling way faster computation and making this approach of subsymbolic or deep learning suddenly viable. Of course, also Jan LeCun, who has been mentioned before, but thanks to his convolutional neural net, viewed as a hybrid approach to neural nets, this subsymbolic thing has kind of become the gold standard in terms of what people do AI by, at least AI that does something like practical. But in particular, this AI is really useful for things like image recognition, speech recognition, things like that. So I'll go on because what drew me to this problem originally was the idea that simply subsymbolic or deep learning or simply symbolic is not gonna cut it. That if we're looking for a more artificial general intelligence, or what Gary Marcus and Ernest Davis would say, an AI that we can trust, then it needs to have some human component. And so I list a few of these things. I'm just going to read them to make sure that I say them all. Neurosymbolic AI is something that I just found out thanks to conversations within this lab that I just found out about. I've been reading a lot of the work of Louis Lamb in this area. It seems like, yeah, primarily you could describe it as mapping logic-based knowledge representation to neural networks. I've been talking to a professor of mine at U Albany a little bit, Jackson Marquez de Carvalho, who has written papers on mathematical semantics, and we've been kind of interested in using the activation functions of using the activation functions of neural nets as mathematical representations of logic gates, and then visualizing those logic gates as one way of looking at neural net's kind of epistemological system that it has within itself. So looking at, for example, if two nodes are converging, if both of them are close to one or close to firing at the same time, then that could be seen as an OR gate, versus just two kind of together approaching the firing threshold, that could be seen as an AND gate, things like that. Okay, so now let's see, line number 4. The possibility also exists, and I saw that Bradly and maybe Jesse has also done work in this area, for human AI, human-assisted AI, which I understand to be running in tandem with humans, who are kind of an integral part of how that system works. So it's kind of augmenting the AI, augmenting the humans, kind of a cybernetic feedback loop between humans and machines, which I also think is super fascinating and very interesting. And then I already mentioned Gary Marcus and Ernest Davis, but I'm reading through Rebooting AI right now, and it's a lot of fun. So my proposed research, and I'm not sure if this is the research I'll actually end up doing, especially after all of the reading and thinking I've been doing lately. But here's where I'm at with it right now, which is basically that I want to put a window in the box, which could also be phrased as decoding the semantics of deep learning. And I'll just read my statement.
Yeah. These are relatively rare, so that's good.
Yeah, I've never seen actually that happen that way before.
So people definitely, this is a way, like this is a template maybe for people to approach. So if, you'll be talking about a topic, you'll review it, you'll give some background, and then you'll kind of propose what you might want to do with it. Definitely, if you can do some reading on like some unsolved problem, that's great. That's exactly where we want to go with this. So, Brian, are you able to talk here?
I think so.
There we go. Good. Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, good. Wonderful. Oh, man. Well, good. I'm glad you saw most of that.
Okay. Why don't you finish? Yeah.
If you want to start back from like your goal slide, I was in the middle of your goal slide.
Yeah.
When I dropped.
Sure. And maybe there's a way I can share it. I've got a couple monitors so that I can kind of see if it's going to crash or not. Hold on. That was wild.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me just. Am I still there?
Switch the tab.
Ring,
but not your presentation.
Yeah.
Sure. Wonderful. I just put it in another thing here. There we go. All right. Well, let's see if this works. Thank you all.
I don't see it.
How about that?
No, it doesn't appear.
Oh my god.
There we go.
Okay, yes.
All right, there we go. That's it.
No, you good? Oh, okay, maybe there's a delay.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is working now. Okay. Everybody can hear me. Everybody can see my proposed research.
Yes.
That's great. Bye, Shayan. Nice to meet you. See you. So, like as far as I can tell, one of the problems we're having with neural net technologies is that we have no way of looking at their reasoning processes. That the hidden nodes are being updated and the correlations are being updated based on, as was mentioned, either agent-based or kind of reinforcement learning, and that really has no way of that the present day state of that implementation in a neural net doesn't really have a way of being represented in a human readable way. Like you can look at graphs and multidimensional representations of how those correlations are built or how they're structured, but you can't really talk to the machine in logic or language about what it's thinking. And I guess I'm interested in making a system that can do that, or in investigating as many ways as doing it as possible. Something that I'm particularly excited about in just this week is the possibility of trying to use the programming language Datalog, of trying to get a way to represent a neural net's knowledge network in Datalog. So using this idea that that you can represent a series of activation functions logically, and then maybe rearranging them by using Datalog as kind of an interface to the inside of the neural net. That's the thing I'm most excited about right now. Yeah. Then I have a bunch of, let's see. Analogous to how you can't really have a direct awareness of how a person is learning. Yes, exactly. Yeah, so it's similar to that, I think, Erin. I think that, and I bring this up in my question slide here at the end. And I think I already read through these, so I'm just going to kind of summarize the thing that I really get thinking about this, which is that machine cognition and human cognition are fundamentally different. And that I wonder what we gain and what we lose from assuming that we can encode a machine with human cognition, like with human, what's the word? With human-like cognition, I guess. Like assuming transhumanistically or post-humanistically that our forms of cognition as humans even apply to machines seems to me something that I'd like to think about or to question.
Yeah, I think that's great.
Yeah, that's great. Like, yeah, you have a lot of questions there. But yeah, I mean, I think those are good. And, you know, we want to winnow that down now to maybe one or two questions that you could move forward with. Or, you know, I think, like, definitely the idea of looking at the difference between machine and human cognition is important. And, you know, we've also talked about animal cognition. Kind of forget about that one. But that's something that I think I've personally been interested in as sort of, you know, we talk about emulating humans. Well, maybe human cognition isn't the thing that we should start with. We should start with maybe some simpler models of cognition or things that we can understand a little bit more. You know, this was the impetus for the Bradenburg vehicles work that we've been doing in the lab, where, you know, Bradenburg vehicles are, for those of you who don't know, these it's a thought experiment that was proposed by a cognitive scientist back in the 80s. And they said, well, we can maybe build these small vehicles, these toy models of cognition, where we have a sensor and an effector on the vehicle. So there's sensors on the front of the vehicle, an effector. In most vehicles, it's the wheels. And the sensor takes in information. The effector moves the vehicle in the environment. And the whole thing is embodied in this vehicle where, you know, you can think of like a car, you know, has, you know, some sensors maybe in the front, wheels that move it. You know, there's a body, so it moves through space, and that body is oriented in different directions. And there's a very simple connection pathway within the vehicle between sensor and effector. And from that set of experiments, we learned that you can emulate, and maybe not, we don't know if it understands what it's doing, but you can emulate certain behaviors. Like they have these behaviors called taxis, which are like where they're simple repulsion or attractive behaviors. So I move towards food, I move away from light, that sort of thing. And then I think Bradenburg in the book even talks about like emotions being something that can be modeled this way. So you can have something that resembles love, which is maybe like a photophilic, which means it moves towards light, or it loves to move towards light. And, you know, there's this it's very simple wiring that is required for that. Now, that doesn't mean that that's the way it works in animal cognition or human cognition. That just means you could reproduce that behavior using that kind of a thing. So this is, you know, I like this comparison between human and machine AI, and maybe, or cognition and even animal cognition, as a way to get to this problem. And I think a lot of the AGI people are very, I think, kept up on trying to emulate human cognition without really understanding what they're doing. So Erin has a couple of comments here. Nice at when assuming, what do we gain, lose? Yeah. And then, or is it counterphobic aggression, moving towards light? Yeah. So, I mean, even there, you don't know what the emotion is. You just kind of categorize it.
The difference between, I think the difference between love and hate in Bradenburg's models is that, like, hate or aggression is like it just slams through the light source, whereas love is like it will approach quickly and then like cautiously guide around it. And it's like these are attempts. These are not attempts at saying this is what love looks like. It's just here's a.
I know. I was pointing at one person's sort of definition, whereas for me, when I'm counterphobic in real life, I might go up and like face off. It would look like love.
Oh yeah, yeah. I was just talking about what's actually
in my stance.
Yeah, that's good. And so that's cool. And then I had two other quick things to say as follow-ups to other stuff, but I don't know what else do we want to do? We don't have that much time left today, so
Yeah.
I'll try to be caught.
Well, why don't we finish up with questions and then just, I don't know if Shaima or Amanda or Samantha had anything they wanted to add. Any questions?
If not, I have 2 points that I would make.
Okay.
Never really points, so much comments. Just things that I like to reference and that we've talked about in the lab a lot beforehand. Whenever I think about the difference between the differences that we talked about, I always think, I go back, I need to read more of his stuff, but I'm kind of a fanboy of Norbert Wiener, who was the cybernetics guy from a long time ago. Yeah. And I don't know if you've seen this specific quote, it looks like you might have known this stuff, but I reference this quote whenever I can, which is, can you see the screen?
Yeah.
But let it be remarked, an important difference between the way in which we use the brain and the machine is that the machine is intended for many successive runs, either with little or no reference to each other, or with minimal limited reference, and that it can be cleared between such runs while the brain, of course, never approximately clears past records. And so it's not a complete analog of a computing machine, but it's more like a single run, and this is big differences in a lot of other stuff. I mean, that's just a cool, fun quote. And then secondly, The Bitter Lesson by Rich Sutton, who's very, a big name in computer stuff. But basically the bitter lesson is, he's totally on the side of we saw him at NeuroIPS a while ago, with a little talk that he had about this. Basically, it's the mind's so complex that if we basically don't use symbolic ways to try to shorthand things, because it's not going to just focus on chasing the problem, and don't get caught up in trying to reduce things to very narrow optimizations, because you're always going to lose out to how he sees computation working ultimately, and don't the bitter lesson from his take on the bitter lesson is that general methods, rather than specifying them, are going to be the most effective. And you can read this essay some other point, but it's sort of it's very. I haven't seen him directly comment on Marcus's stuff yet, but there's all different sorts of camps in the debate of how do we make progress in AI. So I'm just food for thought for later.
Yeah, that's great. I like that first quote. I know Amanda liked it. And I think if you think about the way they typically do psychology experiments, it rings true that, we do psychology experiments, oftentimes we'll do a trial, fixation cross, another trial, they separate them out and then average over. And they're what they call naturalistic methods, which are where they just let an agent or a human or whatever explore the space and then record. You could do brain recordings or something, and then you have to, there's that's where you get the continuous sort of nature of, behavior. So not everything is in these discrete trials, but you have things that are spread out. You'll have reference from 10 minutes ago or 15 minutes ago or 15 seconds ago, and there's sort of the smearing across timescales. And so it's very important to know, and I have some thoughts about that. I'm not going to share this week. I might bring it up next week, but I think that's an important distinction. So I wanted to move on we have a couple more things. Okay. Yeah, Erin says, nice for the Sutton paper. We should revisit the Sutton paper regularly, because I think that's interesting. So I want to talk about a couple of readings. I usually finish meetings off with readings, so if I go over, you can leave if you have to go, but I'm going to try to keep to maybe about 15 minutes on this.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just saying, if any papers are kind of our like closing act. So if anybody has to go or like has questions before they go, feel free to mention them now, or especially just follow up in Slack. I know we kind of had a focus with this meeting had a large focus on a certain aspect of AI talk, but I don't want people to think that's how it's going to be all the time, or like if your project is not based on that, don't worry about it. We have a lot of discussion about some of the other projects and submissions that are up. Will be next week. We'll have some other things to talk about, basically. So don't feel like oh, I don't know, I don't feel good because I don't want to talk about Richard Sutton's paper. That's fine. But just this is the flavor of this general meeting, and if you have things you want to talk about differently next time, you're welcome to do that. So just putting it out there, and thank you for being here, and we can move on to our closing act.
Yeah, like I said, it'll bounce around a lot more in a typical meeting. So the first thing I want to talk about is this blog post by he's a person in France, Pierre Odier, and he's does a lot of stuff with what they call developmental AI. So he's kind of working on AI, he's working on developmental psychology, and then kind of mixing those two things together, cognitive science. So this is their blog, Developmental Systems, and their lab blog. And this is something that he did recently. So this is learning sensory motor agency in cellular automata. So cellular automata are these tools that have, let's see if I can get my board out here. And I use this sometimes to illustrate things. So cellular automata are these grids, and I don't know if they have to be grids always, but typically this is the way they work. So if you have this grid with cells, discrete cells, when they say cellular automata, they mean these discrete cells with an XY or sometimes an XYZ position. And what happens is you can simulate basically collective activity. So let's take this cell here as an example. This is the focal cell. And the cell is organized around its neighbors. So its neighboring cells are like this area here. And they're defined by like x plus 1, x minus 1, y, or y plus 1, y minus 1, x minus 1, x plus 1, and then the catty corner neighbors. So you have this neighborhood surrounding this focal cell. And so what you can do with cellular automata is you can evaluate the states of the neighboring cells to determine the state of the focal cell. So for example, you set up your cellular automata. It's a grid of cells. Each cell has a neighborhood, so it has its neighbors around it. And then you might seed it with like some random states. So these cells can either be on or off. So this one is on that I colored in. This one is off. And so you set up a set of rules where you say the neighbors, if say a majority of the neighbors are on, then the focal cell is already on, or it turns on. If a majority of the cells are off, the cell turns off. So now you can imagine this as like an array where you have every cell has neighbors, and every cell is governed by the behavior of its neighbors. And this propagates patterns all across this network, or this topology, because the neighbors are turning on and off. It's affecting a focal cell that's turning on and off, and that's affecting another focal cell, and so on and so forth. So you can get all these interesting patterns on these grids over time, and you run the simulation for thousands of iterations. You get things that emerge, like patterns. You get different, blocks of activated cells, blocks of deactivated cells. You get things that float across the surface of the cellular automata, and so forth. So this is a very powerful approach, potentially. It's a discrete approach, but it gives you these patterns that emerge in time. And they're based on the interactions of cells and their neighbors. So what this article is about is this platform called Lenia, which is an artificial life platform. They have these little agents that move around. They've done the cellular automata a little bit more in a little bit different way than what I showed you, but basically that's the idea. These little creatures have to survive, and so these are what they call self-organizing agents. So what they're doing is they're finding a robust set of agents with gradient descent in curriculum learning. And they're using this Cellular Automata platform to sort of test this idea. So let's see. Let's go through this. So this is the video here. So you can look at this video. Let me put this in the chat here. I'm going to... Here's the link, and so you can go to the video, and then what you'll find in this blog is, well, we don't talk about that. Let's see. Okay, so the abstract is that novel classes of cellular automata have been recently introduced in the artificial life community. So this is this artificial life field where they're doing things. They're looking at sort of, these living things that aren't human, but they're also not they're not really animals. They're sort of based on animals like single cell organisms or smaller populations of cells, things like that, where sometimes they base them on actual animals, but usually they try to use the principles of very simple neural systems or these models where you have things that what they say looks like life. So that's their criteria. It's a very different approach to artificial intelligence. Actually, here's a Colab notebook. If you're interested in this work, you can follow along in this. And this is something that I mentioned before. If you're interested in looking at like a problem and walking through it with code, you can go to a Colab notebook. And I don't know why sometimes they're a little tricky to open up. Yeah. So here's a Colab notebook where they have the random rules for the cellular automata, like I mentioned. You have these windows where you're going to be able to run this code in a simulation. So here's the code. These are these blobs moving around. This is an underlying grid, and you can see this pattern start to expand. And this is these cells where the cells have different states based on their neighbors. So you can run it again. You can run this version. So you can see how this expands across the grid. And it looks like life. It looks like something that's organic. Of course, it's not, but that's the idea behind artificial life. So why don't we go back to this article? So these CA models are able to generate a high diversity of complex self-organized patterns from local update rules. These patterns can display certain properties of biological systems, such as spatially localized organization, directional or rotational movements, or other things. CAs have a long relationship with biology, the origins of life and cognition. They represent self-organizing systems that serve as a computational test bed, but they can also serve as a source of inspiration. This allows us to, the notions of embodiment within an environment, individuality, and self-maintenance are central in theoretical biology. And they cite Varela and Maturana. This is the autopoiesis approach, which I recommend. It's hard to get into, but there's some good ideas there. It remains unclear how such mechanisms and properties can emerge from a set of local update rules in a cellular automata. So, we have these ideas, we have these things that we want to simulate, but how do you use a model, a computational model, to realize them? So in this blog post, we propose an approach enabling to learn self-organizing agents capable of reacting to the perturbations induced by the environment. So these agents are robust to these perturbations. So if you have an environment where the conditions are always changing, the life is always changing. But sometimes that's not good for a living thing because it can't survive large fluctuations in the environment. So the organisms have to be robust to that change. And this is what they're trying to do. They're trying to develop agents that will survive these swings in conditions. We provide a method based on curriculum learning, on diversity search, and on gradient descent. So they use this certain type of cellular automata to discover rules. So those rules that I told you about were very simple. You can develop your own rules, and sometimes the rules can be very complex. But to do that, you have to discover what they are. So, in order to get a pattern that is, that oozes across the grid, you have to find a certain set of rules that enable that. And so that's that's the tricky part of these kind of models, is that, finding the rules that enable this type of thing. So the idea, it's sort of similar to maybe developmental plasticity, where we don't know why, say, like, for example, the brain unfolds the way it does, or why we learn things, why we learn certain things and not others. Maybe there are rules that happen in the brain that allow us to learn those things. We kind of know some things from cognitive science, like, learning heuristics and things like that. But we don't necessarily know at the cellular level, especially, what exactly is going on. So that's a nice analogy to this, is that you have this set of rules that we have to learn and how this works. And so that's what they're trying to do here. And a lot of times with these computational models, they're decoupled from actual systems. So like I said, this looks like life, but is it really what life is doing? It's not really clear. But they have this interactive demo, and it allows you to see different, I guess it's doing different things here. So this agent is moving around to these different patches. And yeah, so I mean, again, it's hard to interpret what these things are actually doing and what these things mean, but you can generate these kind of simulations. So this demo displays a differential continuous cellular automata system, where an emerging creature, which is in yellow, is the result of local rules applied on the whole grid. So this creature is this oozing set of cells that are activated. They're moving because the rules are enabling this focus on the body of this creature. It's moving across the grid based on the rules. And again, the rules aren't necessarily coordinated, but it happens in a way that's sort of allows for this movement. And so you have to kind of find the rules that enable this. The blue elements are obstacles and are part of the cellular automata system. So the agent can't move into these obstacles. So they have to find their way through these obstacles. And that's the idea. This agent not only has a coherent body, but it has to sort of find a way through this obstacle course. And so when it finds its way through the obstacle course, then we can say that it's learned, perhaps, how to move through. You have this, I think you have another one, an instance where there's a maze, where you have these creatures that can move across this maze, given all these options of moving down, blind alleys and things like that. Can these agents make it from this crypt here all the way down to this goal state? And so again, this is like goal-directed behavior that you're just kind of emerging out of this set of local rules in space. So that's the idea here. And I think this is really nice because it shows how you can take artificial life, how you can take this set of this very simple computational model, at least in theory, and apply it to a problem like this. You don't have to model the brain perfectly. You don't have to have really strong connections to human cognition. You just have to build the system that is, it actually maybe resembles slime molds more than anything else, where slime molds act collective. There are a bunch of cells that act collectively. They move around in the environment. They perhaps achieve goal states. We know that social insects behave in a similar way, where ants will build, colonies. They'll have very diversified roles in their colonies, and they can behave in a way that's somewhat similar to this. So I'm not going to talk anymore about that blog post. I just wanted to point that out. I'm not really sure what I want to talk about next. Maybe I'll talk about this paper. We didn't talk about this last week. And this is maybe, when I do these papers, I don't want people to I want people to come away with an appreciation for what we're looking at. I don't necessarily want to have you understand every last detail. I'm just doing this, and I'll put this in the Slack. So if you want to look at this paper. So this paper, last week we talked about swarm intelligence and swarm models and collective behavior models. And this last blog post kind of went over some of that. This is a very sort of maybe over my head talk about categorical approaches to swarm computations. So this again is building on this idea of local interactions producing global behaviors. And so in this case, they're using certain mathematical tools, category theory being one of them, to model what they call swarm intelligence. Typically, swarm intelligence has been modeled using these kind of computer simulations, where you have a bunch of local rules. The agents are single agents that interact with their neighbors in a certain way, or the environment. And they're just simple local rules. And if you apply these in parallel across a bunch of agents, you get these swarms. So you get like a swarm of bees or a swarm of social insects. So, to recap, you have a bunch of agents distributed in space. They might not be particularly well organized to begin with, but then they have these local rules. So this agent, for example, will interact with its nearest neighbors and react according to the state of its neighbors. So it might not want to get too close to its neighbor. It might not want to get too far away from its neighbor. It might be repulsed by its neighbor in some cases. So you apply these rules, and then when you apply them across agents, sometimes you end up with these swarms. Sometimes you end up with these collective behavioral structures like swarms or flocks or schools or herds or other things where they kind of behave collectively. They behave like that oozing agent that we saw in the first blog post. So that's sort of where we're going with collective behavior and swarm intelligence and all that. In this case, they're using category theory, which is something that we've talked about in previous meetings, and I don't expect anyone to really understand too much about it, except to say that it's this mathematical tool that people use to look at like different categories. So they take information, they put it in different categories, they put them, like, I guess they don't call them sets, they call them categories. And then they have these functors or functions that transform things from one category to another. And so there are other mathematical tools that people can use, but that's basically the idea. You have different categories, you have transformation functions that move things from one category to another, and then you can analyze those in different ways. So they talk about this model that they're proposing from category theory. They can take this swarm intelligence model, they can recast it as a category theory problem, and then they can look at what they call self-organizing processes, which are these collective behavior, these instances of collective behavior. So they cite some work on swarm intelligence, Bonnebaugh in 1999, Kennedy and Eberhard in 2001. Those are some early references for swarm intelligence. People have used swarm intelligence in computer science for programs, to build programming tools. Behavioral ethologists or animal behavior people have used it to understand actual swarms of insects. People have used this as an analogy for collective behavior in humans or in other contexts. And basically, there's been a lot of different fields that have been interested in this approach. And it's very powerful, potentially, but we have to understand how to put it into mathematical terms before we can really benefit from this phenomenon that we see in nature. So they talk about some of the things that you see in swarm intelligence. There are two main types of biologically active matters. So there are attractants, which are like insect pheromones, which attract these agents to different paths or different locations in space. Like ants, when they build trails, they'll lay down attractant on the ground, and then the ants will follow that and form a trail. Sometimes they'll also use repellents, which repel their other agents from dangerous situations. We talked about this with Bradenburg vehicles. You can represent these as a graph. You can represent these in different ways computationally, but these are also these rules that I talked about with cellular automata. You can have these as simple rules. And so we have to figure out which things are being attracted, which things are being repelled, and that would be the thing that you'd have to discover. And so they talk about swarm intelligence a bit. They talk about like how you might model this computationally, and there's a lot of work that's been done on this in different ways, and even a little bit on consciousness, although I'm not really crazy about like getting into consciousness from this because there's a huge space in between these two things. Special attention has been paid to biological swarms like ants and bee colonies, fish schooling, birds flocking. We talked about boids last week, horse herding, bacterial colonies. So like even things like slime molds where you have a bunch of cells that are behaving collectively towards a single goal, or sometimes just in a single coordinated way. We don't want to necessarily say goal because we don't know that, right? We talked about that earlier. So then they talk about this categorical method. So the method we employ is categorical, which means that it relies on finding the suitable category K where a swarm W would be embedded. So you have this swarm W, it's embedded in this category K, and that's what they need to find. So this is the way they're approaching, a little bit different than the rule-based system that I mentioned before. Then they talk about category theory and, sort of and there's a lot of stuff on, there's a lot of topology in there that I'm not going to get into. I lost my place. I'm not sure if there are any images in here we want to go through, but they kind of get into the swarms as a category again. And so they follow this pseudo-atomic model, which is like where they break things down into single the smallest set of agents they can find. They use the model of actin filaments. Before, this can be represented by a graph, which is this 3 dimensions and a function where V is a set of vertices, E is a set of edges, Q is a set of allowed states, and F is a transition function. So you have like basically a graph where you have nodes, connections between the nodes, edges. Q is a set of allowed states, so it can take a number of states, but you will only allow so many different possibilities. And then F is a transition function where those node states are switched from one state to another. And so then you look at the new states that come about with the system's evolution, and you kind of you figure all that out, and that's your categorical representation. So it's a little bit different than the sort of the collective behavior representation I talked about with cellular automata, and that you don't have that representation. It's different with the grid, and this gives you different control. So when you talk about mathematical models, sometimes the way you formalize the problem is it gives you certain advantages and disadvantages. So the advantage of something like this is you have sets, you have transformation functions you can use, you can track this thing through time. With a CA, you can't necessarily do that, but there are other advantages to using a cellular automata. So I don't think there's much more to say about this. I don't want to get too deeply into it because it's just, we could be here all day. But it's basically, there's no general theory of swarm computation which would summarize all the approaches. There's no meta-mathematics or foundations of swarm intelligence, but we try these different models to see which works best. So they just want to identify isomorphic computational structures to define types and their hierarchies of different chemical and biological systems that represent swarm. So there are a lot of different types of swarming. We can use a lot of different types of models, and people have algorithmic, agent-based models, mathematical models. The question is finding the right one for your needs, or finding a general model which doesn't seem to exist. And I would say, maybe it doesn't exist, but we don't know. So, all right, that's all I'm going to say for that. And let's go over these chat questions before we wrap it up for today. Brian said, it was just my copy of Stephen Wolfram's A New Kind of Science. Love Cellular Automata. Yes, it's a very good book. And we talk about that sometimes. We bring that book up. And so that's good. Erin says, love Cellular Automata. Thank you, Erin. Jesse says, it's really effective, especially for against living things.
That's a very specific reference that nobody would probably get, but I had to say it for myself.
Okay.
It's a line. It's a specific line from a video game, basically.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, and then I was saying the last thing looked kind of like Rainbow vehicles with little lights bouncing around going different things, so that was cool.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of parallels here. So you'll notice that when we go through these readings, I try to pair things up so that we have like this set of themes. And so definitely if people have questions after the meeting, put them in Slack, follow up next week. So that's the way we do things here. It's very, we try to be synthetic about it. Oh yes, tearing up, smiling at Jesse's comment.
Yeah, and I'm actually working. So we've had just a little like lab administrative back-end discussion. We've had many different ways of trying to record or annotate or document our meetings, because some of the coolest things are the connections that are made or glanced at. You can kind of get a very broad general conceptual overview of something, and you look into it later and see if it applies to what you want to build out. But like, we've used Notion for this, we've used something from GitHub for this, and I'm experimenting with a few things, and this is a teaser. Maybe I'll say more next time when I can refine it more. But if I, specifically for interns, I'll say, like, if you are looking for a way to, like, you may ask yourself a very basic fundamental question of, okay, great, this is all cool. How do I start taking notes or organizing some of my thoughts about this? That's a conversation I'm up for having, and I have some suggestions. And like, if you want to schedule I kind of want to schedule a general meeting with everyone, just like, okay, what's your outlook? What do you think you want to do, and how can we kind of support you in developing that? But I also have like some specific, maybe some like programs or applications, like note taking things that you could use that may help you in this, because I think it's sort of like a intellectual component, but then like, how do you put that into notes and construct a research database for yourself? That's like, it's complicated when you're staying in one discipline. Like, I just want to study biology. Like, that's hard. And now when we cut across, it's wicked hard. So I don't want anybody to feel overwhelmed by that. But like, just understand, like, that's the conversation that we can have, and there's some tools that are available, and I'm continuously experimenting with some of them. So conversations forthcoming about that as well. So I'll leave it at that. Anything else you wanted to say, Bradley? Any other comments you wanted to say before we close?
Yeah, I'm done. I saw Shaima was on camera. I didn't know she had something to say.
Oh, no, I didn't. I just turned it on.
Okay, yeah.
Oh.
Okay, well, thanks for attending. Yeah. Thanks for attending, and I think that's enough for this week. Next week we'll be meeting, and we'll be, again, bring your comments to this next meeting, and hopefully we'll interact in the Slack on some topics. So thanks all for attending. Have a good week.